USA Emergency Broadcast Network, your source for reliable disaster preparedness information.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily the views of this station, its management, sponsors, or other hosts. If you have any comments or suggestions about this program, please contact us at radio@usaebn.org. That's radio@usaebn.org.
Welcome to a new Zeta report here on USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. We are live first Mondays of every month, and then we're also on the YouTube channel for Nancy Leader. I'd like to welcome back to the show Nancy from Zeta Talk. Nancy, good morning.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. And we have a very interesting show. Until I really compiled it, I didn't realize how many excuses had been issued to cover as a cover for a Nibiru, evidence of Nibiru coming at us. I think there's I counted 19 different excuses. Anyway, we're going to rattle them off and what they're supposed to, and how that counters or doesn't line up with the evidence. Before we get going, let me read our standard disclaimer. In partnership with the USAEBN, Zeta Talk and the Zeta Report will be discussing the challenges of living on a planet beset with change, rising seas, increasing earthquakes, volcanic activity, weather gone wild, and the worry of what to do next in a worst-case scenario. We will also inject Zeta Talk prophecy on what is coming next and advice on readiness plans and safe locations. Whenever Zeta Talk is quoted, please remember that prophecy is not fact. It is opinion. It only becomes fact when it happens. The Zetas are remarkably accurate but have been wrong on occasion. Bear that in mind. For more information on this subject, please visit zetatalk.com or the Zeta Report on YouTube. And as Andre mentioned, this show will be wrapped up into Nancy Leader YouTube channel, as well as be an iPod or whatever downloadable on the USAEBN website. Okay, one of the first Nibiru excuses was global warming, the claim that the Earth was warming due to carbon emissions from burning fossil fuels. By 2009, this got a boost from Al Gore, who called this all an inconvenient truth. But where climatologists were bullied to comply with the UN posture on the carbon footprint, most scientists found the premise flawed. It's the opposite of what the media was telling you. Say, oh, scientists agree, but that's not true. By 2012, those crushed into silence by the establishment went vocal. Quoting the New American on July 31st, 2012, more than 31,000 scientists in the United States have signed a petition urging the U.S. government to reject the kinds of policies proposed by the UN and environmental extremists. Forget any notion that 4,000 scientists supported the claim as mentioned by the IPCC. The only explicit evidence is for support from just less than 60 individuals, 60 versus 31,000. And it was the media supported it, and it's still going on. Oh, carbon footprint, we're creating all this horrible weather. Well, we're not. The Zetas nailed it in 1995 with their unerring logic. Quoting Zeta Talk in 1995, the warming of the Earth's oceans around the globe, this has been measured as a 6-inch rise worldwide on all the beaches. The waters have risen because they are warmer, and warm water takes up more room than cold water, as his elementary physics books will report. How is it that the oceans, so very deep and so very cold, have warmed up? Is it the almost imperceptible rise in the temperature of the air, a degree or so, as reported to date? Since heat rises, why would this slight rise affect the oceans? Meteorologists will tell you that the effect of air warming is air turbulence, not warmer oceans. Now we go to volcanoes. Are we going to have a sea level rise? Yes, in the opinion of the Zetas, but not due to hot air, but due to heat from the roiling magma and plate movement. This is already apparent in the increase in volcanic activity. Early in the Zeta Talk saga, the Zetas predicted that, in their opinion, that all but truly extinct volcanoes would awaken. If Active within the last 10,000 years, they would awaken. Chantane in Chile erupted in 2008 following a 9,000-year period of dormancy. Before the eruption began in September 17, 2006, Four-Peaked Volcano in Alaska erupted in 2006, but had been dormant for over 10,000 years. Then there are the earthquakes, which have increased exponentially this past decade. This despite the USGS apparently underreporting magnitude, so the scope and damage done by a quake does not sync with the magnitude assigned by the USGS. The USGS also dropped quakes from their database before the eyes of astonished observers. Thus, charts generated would show less of a statistical increase. One excuse was that fracking, pumping wastewater into the ground to force oil to the surface, caused earthquakes. Fracking had been done in the U.S. since 1903 without causing quakes, but suddenly in 2009 this was the excuse for the quake increase. NPR suggested earthquakes were caused by landslides, which were caused by rain. Queries made to the USGS suggested that the rattling windows the public was reporting were caused by thunderstorms nearby, or perhaps, as we were joking, a herd of elephants thundering by. Then there is the leap second excuse. The need to insert leap seconds from the rotation of the Earth gradually slowing is causing earthquakes. Oops. The statistics don't follow the theory. Sorry, but it was out there in the news. Quoting Live Science in 2017. Past periods of slow rotation over the last 100 years have coincided with more earthquakes than average, according to research presented last month at the annual meeting of the Geological Society of America. The basic idea is that as the Earth spins slower, the equator shrinks. Slowing of the Earth, long predicted by the Zetas as Nibiru comes closer, is now being blamed on the moon. It's out there tugging on the Earth. But hasn't it been doing that since the beginning of man? Why are the earthquakes just skyrocketing now? Quoting Yahoo News in 2017, more powerful earthquakes could rock the globe in 2018 because of infinitesimal changes in the speed of the Earth's rotation. Historical data since 1900 clearly reveal a strong link between major global earthquake activity and a slight slowing of the Earth's rotation for 5 or 6 years. Oh my, I didn't know that. Little leap second here or there, and that explains all those earthquakes. In the opinion of the Zetas, a slowing rotation of the Earth will occur during the last weeks before their predicted pole shift, because of a magnetic grip by Nibiru on the mid-Atlantic Rift. And you know, here we go into history, because this was definitely recorded during the Jewish Exodus. First, a quote from the Zetas. The mid-Atlantic Ocean lines up over former lava flows from the renting apart of the continents, the mid-Atlantic Rift. Rotation stops with the Atlantic Rift facing the approaching Nibiru, so Africa and Europe are turned a bit more towards the sun than the North American continent. Therefore, the long day described by Joshua and the long night described by the West Coast Indians. Remember that quote in the Bible? Joshua said, asked God to stop the sun in the middle of the sky so he could win his battle, and that happened. You know, but actually this was all during the turmoil of the pole shift, and everybody's running around with their hair on fire. Right. Very upsetting.
Well,
so, and by the way, that was...
Nancy, I want to
yes?
mention, too,
sure.
You know, a lot of people look at these catastrophe or cataclysmic cycles, and they think that they're all separate. And then they disregard, say what you will about the Bible, but it is a document written by people of that time. Hopefully,
yes,
don't want to get too far out into the woo-woo world, but you know, it is the events described in there can line up for different timelines for the passage of Nibiru, and one of those is the Atlantic Rift being pulled, and then a long day, and then the long night on the west coast of the Americas. would explain a pole shift event, correct?
Exactly, and here we go with quoting Velikovsky. If anybody hasn't discovered him, particularly Earth in Upheaval, is just loaded with facts, and it just knocked me off. That's where I became a believer that Nibiru was, coming through every 3,600 years, So, quoting Velikovsky, a story is told about Joshua ben Nun, who, when pursuing the Canaanite kings at Ben Beth-horon, implored the sun and the moon to stand still. That's Joshua 10, verses 12 to 13. Allowing for the difference in latitude, it must have been early morning or night in the Western Hemisphere. We go to the shelf where stand books with the historical traditions of the Aborigines of Central America. In the Mexican Annals of Cachuhin, written in Nahua Indian, it is related that during a cosmic catastrophe that occurred in the remote past, the night did not end for a long time. The moon also stood still. Now, how logical is that? It just fits, right? And by the way, I must mention that this prediction that we're going to have it for the forthcoming pole shift, predicted pole shift, is in the opinion of the Zetas. And they say this because the rift running down the center of the Atlantic, which is pulling apart as Pangea floats the continents apart from each other, and every time it does that during a passage and the crustal shift, being jerked around, then lots of lava, and it hardens. It hardens under the influence of magnetism that's in process at that time. In other words, it's becoming a big magnet, because that's what happens when you make magnets. You melt the iron, you line up the little iron, atoms, and then when the iron hardens, it's a magnet, and that's how it happens. So it happened to our mid-Atlantic rift. Going on with red dust. Notable in legend and prophecy about the end times is the red dust that shows up, coloring lakes and rivers blood red. Quoting the book of Revelations, and the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became blood. Now, and we're getting this. We're getting red dust all over the world, not just the red skies, but, people say, well, it's all over my car, it's all over the snow in Siberia. I mean, so much evidence of it, but every time it comes up, it's dust from the Sahara. Reports of red dust began after 2003, coloring the moon a blood red or dusting the snow in Siberia or in a bird bath. When tested, the red dust would prove to be iron oxide, the legendary red dust in the tale of Nibiru. Among the excuses proffered by the establishment was industrial pollution. But the favorite was orange dust from the Sahara, blown high and spreading to Europe and the Caribbean. But a recent study states this is not possible. The particles recovered by the Royal Netherlands Institute for Sea Research found the particles blamed on Sahara winds were far too heavy. Quoting Science Alert, between 2013 and 2016, the Royal Netherlands Institute for Sea Research, NIOZ, found some dust particles nearly 50 times bigger than what global winds were once thought capable of carrying. Not a little bit heavier, 50 times heavier. No way. Didn't come from the Sahara. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the Sahara, the dust from the sand or dust from the Sahara that causes a lot of the storm and hurricane formation that comes off of that side of Africa and blows around the world, isn't that sand or dirt beige or almost yellow in color too?
Yes, it's not red, right? Not at all.
That's a bad argument.
Yeah, I know, but you still get it. I mean, they don't give up.
Okay.
It's like they go out with it, and no matter what, so it's interesting.
But
nobody
it's not red.
Okay. It's not red, and nobody ever puts them on a lie detector machine either. That's not allowed either. No. Now, if a scientist somewhere says it, then y'all have to just kind of go along, because they know better.
Right.
Who are you to argue? Are you going to believe
They're
them or
getting
your
paid
lying
more
eyes?
than you.
Yes. They went to school or whatever.
And they're getting bribed by, okay. Whatever.
Oh, they're being threatened, too. Either they cooperate or... Yeah. Neon clouds. Then there are the neon clouds appearing more and more often since Nibiru entered the inner solar system. These are not auroras, and the establishment had no explanation for them. But Zeta Talk did. In the opinion of the Zetas, this is grease in the tail of Nibiru set alit, and I quote. This is in regard to the blue Norway swirl that was seen grounding in 2009. And people got a picture of it. It was this swirl in the sky, and all of a sudden this blue corkscrew thing came down to ground, and they blamed it on that it was a Russian rocket that was blown, and that was the rocket trails or some garbage. But anyway, it was quite dramatic. And the Zetas say, the neon appearance is caused by a chemical reaction akin to man's familiar light sticks. What has occurred over Norway is a neon cloud, a grease cloud, lit by the electrical charge from the tail of Planet X, or Planet X Nibiru, same thing. Why the great swirl in the clouds around the swirling neon display? An electrical charge in the sky is not a static matter. As the path of lightning shows, what occurs at the center of such a charged swirl is more electrical charge than the surrounding swirl. Thus, the center becomes a neon cloud that can be seen even at night and wants to discharge or ground in the earth. End of the quote from the Zetas. Now, what they're saying is the grease in the tail of Nibiru, which dragged back and forth over the eons through the asteroid belt, and when Nibiru used to go through there, it would pelt a lot of minor planets to pieces, and some of those were life-bearing planets, water planets, fishes, and all that kind of stuff, and therefore they had organic compounds. Thus, these organic compounds are dragged along with the tail of Nibiru, which is charged because of all the iron oxide, and Nibiru is big planet, 23 times as massive as the Earth, and magnetic, and so all of this drags along with Nibiru, and when it comes and swafts into our atmosphere, those are organics. It's like somebody puffed up a lot of gasoline or something, and if we get any kind of an electrical, it turns into a gorgeous, neon cloud, and they are seen now and then and photographed, and they're just lovely, but well, here we are. The establishment excuse for the 2009 Norway swirl, it was a Russian rocket. Never mind that none of that made sense, as the spiral went from the sky to the ground, not the other way around. The point of these Nibiru excuses is to get something, anything in the press, so the public does not start to connect the dots. Trying to gain the upper hand as the red dust thickens and neon clouds proliferate, NASA came out with a topper in 2017. If you see red in the sky or glowing neon clouds of various colors, it's not Nibiru, it's just NASA dusting the ionosphere to check the jet stream up there. This announcement was accompanied by rockets blasting skyward across the Atlantic, scattering red and green dust, which can hit the news, and it's supposed to burn its way into your brain. And you say, oh, no, that's just NASA. They're running a test. Quoting U.S. News, a high-flying science experiment may color the skies above the U.S. mid-Atlantic coast with bluish-green and red clouds, as NASA seeks to learn more about charged particles at the top of Earth's atmosphere. They were gorgeous pictures, but it didn't last. But they definitely said, if you see this, you know what it is, just NASA. What excuse could possibly be proffered for the second sun sightings that regularly occur primarily at sunrise and sunset, when light rays in the red spectrum bend around the curve of the Earth, making the rising or setting sun huge? Those seeing the second sun are astonished and realize they're not getting the truth from the establishment. Solar simulators, which were patented by NASA in 1966, have been seen in the skies See the second sun? Oh, that's just one of those solar simulators. That's the excuse. There really was a patent from 1966, and the thing is, I don't know. You're not that large, I guess as big as your dining room table maybe. And if they have them puffed up in the sky or hung there somehow by a balloon or whatever, or a drone, they were used. The patent was to test NASA equipment, like for the ISS or whatever, spacewalking, to see if it could withstand the UV light from the sun. So it was supposed to fry equipment and fry, just as a test. It was used as a simulator. How close can we go? So now they were actually tossing them up in the sky, and people would make a picture of it and say, "Oh, look, what's that? Oh no, it's the simulator." There was 2 or 3 of that, one up in Minnesota somewhere. What explanation does NASA have for tossing a solar simulator up there in the sky willy-nilly at dawn or dusk, other than to be used as a Nibiru excuse? Quoting Metabunk in 2016, the old 1960s NASA sun simulator was for an environmental test chamber right here on Earth to simulate the sun found in space. It was used to test electronics, metal and plastic materials, lenses, glass and plastic, and anything else that would be subject to outer atmosphere solar ray testing. It was for simulating outer space sun here on Earth in a person-sized chamber that could be vacuumed of air. So what was it doing up in the skies in Minnesota? It was so that there could be someone saying, "But I've seen it in the media. The media said so, and they never lie." Sunspots. In the opinion of the Zetas, the establishment which directs NASA had always intended to blame the sun for many of the phenomenon anticipated to be caused by the approach of Nibiru. There are sunspots, the solar wind, and NASA can control and tweak the data given to the public. Perfect, or so they thought, but the sun did not cooperate. It went to sleep with hardly any sunspots. Comparing 2013 sunspot activity at the solar max to the sunspot activity in 2002, the prior solar max, it was reduced by half. It just went to sleep. This after the establishment made a big push to get the public to blame the sun, painting a hypothetical situation. It's really sad. They've gone out and fallen on their face so many times, but they're still trying. This hyperbole was based on an 1859 event called the Carrington event, where auroras were seen in the south and telegraph lines experienced disruptions. Quoting New Scientist in 2009, "Space storm alert 90 seconds from catastrophe. A violent storm 150 kilometers away on the surface of the sun. It sounds ridiculous. Surely the sun couldn't create so profound a disaster on Earth. Yet an extraordinary report funded by NASA and issued by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, NAS, in January this year claims it could do just that." So they were saying, watch out, the sun is going to create huge blackouts here on Earth. And blackouts have happened. As a matter of fact, we're getting them periodically as EMP disasters pick up more and more because our electronics is vulnerable. Don't I know? I've been zapped a couple times here at home. Lost my water heater and had to put copper around my outdoor surveillance cams. That works, by the way, let me tell you. Wrap your stuff in copper. Yep. Okay, EMP disasters began afflicting mankind in 2009 when airplanes started experiencing total electrical failure. Air France 447 was the first such incident to hit the media, and despite the media reporting that the electrical systems were failing one by one, the reason for the crash was blamed on the pilot. Poor guy just didn't know how to fly in bad weather. Quoting New York Times in 2009, automatic messages relayed by the jetliner indicate the autopilot had disengaged. suggesting Du Bois and his two co-pilots were trying to thread their way through the dangerous clouds manually. A key computer system had switched to alternate power, and controls needed to keep the plane stable had been damaged. An alarm sounded indicating the deterioration of flight systems. At 11:13 p.m., more automatic messages reported the failure of systems to monitor airspeed, altitude, and direction. Control of the main flight computer and wing spoilers also failed. The last automated message at 11:14, a minute later, indicated complete electrical failure and a massive loss of cabin pressure. Catastrophic events indicating the plane was breaking apart and plunging toward the ocean. Now, this was an automatic system. What do they call it? ACARS or something like that. And it was automatically reporting back, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong. Every single system on that plane went out, wink, wink, wink. But, the pilot didn't know how to fly. And after that, we started getting to pilot suicide, or maybe they abducted everybody on the plane, alien abduction, who knows. But anything but EMP caused by Nibiru. And they're still up at it. They're still going strong with this garbage. What excuse can we use? Has Nibiru been admitted by any country, by NASA or any scientists? Some individuals come out and say something. A couple of Russians have said, but it doesn't go outside of Russia. It's like, say something and you're dead is the way it is. They're terrified that people will find out it's real. They've been lied to. The rich have their bunkers, etc. And the excuses are absurd, but here we go. Many planes followed, such as the MH370 going off radar and disappearing in Indonesia, German wings flying into the Alps, and MS-807 spiraling suddenly into the Mediterranean. All such incidents promised to find faulty parts or blame a suicidal pilot. All gave clear evidence that EMP taking out the plane's electrical systems were at fault. And I've detailed that on my website, and it's detailed other places also. EMP loves to ground in water, as does lightning. It is also attracted to rock under stress, giving electronic screech. What happens is that the air bubbles get squeezed out of rock under stress. Then the electricity can flow through the rock unimpeded by air bubbles, which are an insulator, and that's what the Zetas call electronic screech. Air France 447 was over the highly magnetized mid-Atlantic rift. MH370 was over the waters of Indonesia, the Sunda plate being aggressively pushed down. MS-803 and German wings were flying over the plate border between the African plate and the Great Eurasian plate. Pardon me, that was MS-804. Meanwhile, the official site modeling the Earth's magnetosphere showed a magnetosphere in utter disarray, mangled. The normal bow shock facing the sun with wings blowing out into space behind the Earth looked like spaghetti or vomit. The establishment has no explanation other than to blame the sleepy sun. That's all coming from the sun, the solar, sunspots, and they can lie because NASA controls all this, or the establishment, the scientists, they control what we're told about the solar wind, etc., or even what the sun looks like. They have the photos, they have, the charts, and so they can lie to you and not be challenged. Okay, and the North Pole drift? How does this relate to the rapidly migrating magnetic North Pole of Earth, which is rapidly moving to Siberia? Russia, which is more honest about Nibiru than the rest of the world, has this to say, quoting RT in 2019. Scientists think a high-speed jet of liquid iron under Canada could be responsible for the pole's movement, weakening the magnetic field below and allowing Siberia to draw over the pole. So now we have magnospurts. That's a newie. This begs the question, what's causing the high-speed jet of liquid iron? Where'd that come from? After all the Of course, the Zeta has for decades described the effect of Nibiru on the Earth as roiling the magma, thus the uptick in volcanic eruptions. And as usual, the Zetas can't explain, in the opinion of the Zetas. Where magnetospheres are most often depicted as circular, they are in fact most often twisted into odd shapes by the strong magnets in their vicinity. Earth's magnetosphere itself is twisted by forces from the Sun, so that there is a tight nub of magnetic flow lines sunside, what they call the bow shock, but long streaming wings out behind the Earth. Enter the monster planetary magnet Nibiru, which is now positioned between the Earth and the Sun, and pointing its magnetic north pole toward the Earth. Thus, for several years, the magnetic north pole of Earth has been drifting toward Siberia, forcing periodic adjustments in navigational systems. And this is a fact. They have to go out and redraw lines in airports and make sure that the planes that cannot use their compass for some reason can at least see which way is north and south and say, wait, we got to line up, because that's how bad it got. I have that all documented on my website, which has been there for 25 years, and I can't tell you where it is. You have to use the search engine, but you'd find it. Speaking of the poles of Earth, there is yet another phenomenon caused by the presence and approach of Nibiru, which the establishment wants to blame on polar ice. This is the daily Earth wobble, which Nibiru watchers worldwide have been measuring by the location and timing of the sunrise and sunset. For instance, sunrise too far north and too early, or the sun setting too early one day, so that it's pitch black at 5:30 p.m., and then the next day the sun is still shining at 5:30 p.m. I've seen that here recently. What excuse could the establishment possibly muster for this? Quoting The Guardian in 2016, global warming is changing the way the Earth wobbles on its polar axis, a new NASA study has found. Melting ice sheets, especially in Greenland, are changing the distribution of weight on Earth, and that has caused both the North Pole and the wobble, which is called polar motion, to change course, according to a study published in the journal Science Advances. End of the quote. The daily Earth wobble has been affecting global weather worldwide for over a decade, but lately it has gotten more extreme. This daily Earth wobble is caused by Nibiru, by the way. Extreme cold in the part of Siberia pushed away by the magnetic north pole of Nibiru, and extreme heat in Australia, which has been drawn up into the equator by the wobble. Quoting the Big Wobble, that's our website. Extreme temperature contrast on January 18th, 2019. Almost 119 degrees Fahrenheit in Tibooburra, Australia, where the poor kangaroos are dropping over dead, and minus 71 or almost 72 Fahrenheit up there in Delyansk, Russia. Record snow dumps occurred in January from Austria through Persia to India. We're just having it's either hot or cold, and it's switching around. And boy, we just have that in Wisconsin here too. Went from minus 32, and then 2 days later we're 47 above 40. Fahrenheit. Yeah, yep. That's over an 80-degree swing, which I'm thrilled about. Go, wow, now here's the snow melting. I look out my window.
Yeah, I'm planting my tomatoes right now.
And early spring, well, the groundhog thinks we're going to have early spring, but the weatherman says we're going to be gripped through in the cold, and they're arguing with each other. And anyway,
wait 4 days for the wobble.
Yeah. No excuses for all this are being offered by the establishment. They have long since stopped citing how many records are being broken. I remember when they used to do that. Say, these are the records that are broken. And then they were told to just shut up. Just say, this is what it is outside. Have a good day. Click. Because it was too embarrassing. Well, they didn't want the public to be aware of what was going on, what it amounts to. The less said, the better. Quoting Zeta Talk in 2005, The weatherman already simply shrugs his shoulders and admits it has all become unpredictable, no longer looking uncomfortable when records are being broken daily. I think they had to switch out some people. They had people that couldn't deal with it, and they knew something was wrong, and they put two and two together, or they heard by the grapevine that we were going to have another passage of Nibiru, and it could be like the Jewish Exodus, and God knows, and the volcanoes, and and they
a lot
couldn't
of them
keep a straight
too.
face.
No, I mean they couldn't, and then so they got replaced. I mean, Al Roker, I don't know what it is what it is. What happened to him with the Today Show and everything? But a lot of these meteorologists and TV weather people, I'm pretty sure they have to sign some documentation before they go on air, like non-disclosure agreement or this. Don't say chemtrail ever. These are the new clouds. Say these words. That sort of thing.
Yeah. And I remember way back, closer to 2003, when this was a relatively new phenomenon. That somebody wrote to me that they were sitting in an IHOP or, one of those pancake places, and said there was a couple of weather people in the booth next to them, and they were saying, when will we be allowed to talk about this like that? And it was so clear they had been told, this is a verboten subject, you just don't bring it up at all. But I think I noticed that there was some changing out, and I think there were some people who can lie with a straight face and others who cannot. And if you looked squirmy and distressed, you couldn't be out there. You had to be able to lead people with a straight face. And this way, it's going to be okay. Go back to shopping. It's always tell the sheeple to go back to shopping. Well,
exactly.
I just have a little bit more to talk about. Yet one more excuse, and then we can explain to people what they should be doing as things get worse and worse. Using chemtrails to fog up the sky so evidence of Nibiru and its many moon swirls would be hidden from the public has been gone on for over a decade. As Nibiru becomes more obvious in the skies, what will the cover-up do? Invent yet another excuse for fogging up the skies. Quoting RT in November 2018, since the world can't seem to agree on reducing CO2 emissions, why not tackle the problem from the other end? Scientists from Harvard and Yale have surmised. The researchers recently published a study which says that spraying large amounts of sulfate particles into the Earth's lower stratosphere in order to literally dim out the sun could cut the effects of global climate change in half, and it might even be cheap. That's the end of the quote from RT. So they're going to go up there, and they're not even going to deny it. They say, we're fogging it up because it's global warming, we're trying to help. We're trying to put the brakes on climate change, all this rising seas and everything. So one excuse after another, but those are the ones that I've compiled to date. But, creative excusery lives. Now, what should you do with all of this? Should you, believe your lion eyes or listen to the media? And if you take it seriously, which you should, self-sufficiency is the answer. You live in a city and you're used to trotting down the street and going to the grocery store, and it's always stocked up and everything's fine. You should worry. Because at a minimum, you should have container gardens on your porch, know how to save seed, be growing things like pumpkins and winter squash, which keep beautifully, things like tomatoes, which have vitamin C and A, learning how to have red wigglers in green compost because you can eat those earthworms, and they make soil, they make nitrogen, for the plants. They break it down. Get into this stuff. If you can have free-range chickens in your backyard or your neighborhood, you should be doing this. All they need is a safe place to stay. They need sunlight, so I notice that our hobby farmers are letting their chickens out for a little sunlight even when the weather is cold or their bones go soft, and they lay eggs, they eat bugs, and then you can eat chicken and eggs instead of eating bugs. So you have to get with that and think about all this. There's a huge amount of information on USA EBN. And my, videos also, my website, going to the newsletters, back and back and back, where periodically we go berserk and talk about all the, self-sufficiency things that you should be doing. You got to get started because when it hits, you can expect the grid will go down, that there won't be, the roadways will be busted up, and you won't be able to get gasoline or oil because every distribution line will bust and set a fire, and there you are, it won't last for long. People will have to re-engineer to wood gas, and big life changes. Shortwave radio, I have a crank shortwave radio because the radio stations might not be, but if you can have shortwave and stick something up as an antenna in the air, I remember somebody doing that with a fishing pole and fishing line at my house once, then you can connect with other shortwave folk. What about electricity? You can do that by pedaling on a bike. You can build a windmill from car parts. All you need is an alternator, etc. You can make those vanes in the windmill that'll turn out of anything, So your car battery, DC, direct current, then you've got your shortwave. Most camping equipment and boating equipment is DC, direct current, All of this, we've offered a ton of information. It's on USA EBN and ZetaTalk.com, and I'm talked out, Andre. We're about to be cut off anyway.
Yep, we've got a couple more minutes to go. I wanted to also mention that with the Wobble, to coincide with the preparedness piece too, is like a lot of people have had a little taste of a little mini ice age last week or so, going through the upper Midwest and then eventually to the East Coast with this, what they're calling polar vortex, which wasn't a thing 5 years ago if you look back. But hey, we make it up as we go along when we're lying to people on TV. So, if you were ready for, like for instance, in my situation, in my personal apartment/condo, if the power went out, I have electric heat. I'm done. I mean, if it's negative 45 outside or negative 25 for that matter, and I don't have heat, you have to go through so I converted my my fireplace over into a wood-burning stove. Okay, now you need wood. So, I mean, you go through that process. It's like once you get caught, like in one of these situations, a tornado or earthquake or a flood or an extreme weather situation such as a snowstorm or extreme cold, where you're stuck for 5, 6, 8 days at a time, that's good practice. It may not be fun at the time, but that's really good practice for a more extended time of no power, no water, no gas, no electricity, that sort of thing. So you can do those. It's not fun to practice, but it's better to be prepared than not be prepared. That's why it's pre-paired, So, yeah, we got a little taste of shut in. I didn't leave the house.
We didn't either. We stocked up ahead of time, and then we dribbled. If you keep your faucets running and there's moving water,
you got to run water.
You won't get. And I had no burst pipes at all, but I know some people that did, and so that's a trick. And also, as I've talked to some people in northern Canada, and they plug their cars in. They have something that attaches to the the motor block, and it keeps it warmer, so that the oil, otherwise the oil becomes gel. I remember a horrible story before I moved back to Wisconsin, was about a family in rural Wisconsin, 50 below, and they had their oil tank outside the house, and the oil turned to gel and wouldn't flow through the line, and they broke up all the furniture in the house and burned it until it was, and then of course they went out to try to start the car, no hope there, and they just froze to death.
Really?
If you're used to the northern climes, and I spent a summer in Alaska one time, and and the convoys that went through told me that whoever was in charge of driving the truck had to go out every 15 minutes and move the truck by a couple inches, or the tires literally became flat in some places,
Flat
and then,
on
you know,
one side, yeah.
and you couldn't get rid of that.
Yep.
You know, that was misshapen. So they had, and of course they never turned off the engines. You know, you learn that stuff if you're in the cold zone. If you're not, it's a shock. Yeah. Fortunately, Wisconsin is supposed to, in the opinion of the Zetas, be like Alabama, and Alaska is going to be just right on the new equator too. So, you know, it's if you check out, in the opinion of a Zeta, where the safe locations are going to be, and move. We're going to be
prepared.
Okay. Yeah, be prepared.